Government shutdown. Day 6, and the clock is ticking toward another deadline. Congress must raise the debt ceiling in less than 2 weeks, or for the first time in our history, the country goes into default. Joining me now, the Secretary of the Treasury, Jack Lewin. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you, Chris.
This week, both you and the President seem to be trying to panic the markets about both raising the debt ceiling and the government shutdown, saying that they should be more concerned. Here's the President.
I think this time's different. I think they should be concerned. When you have a situation in which a faction is willing, potentially, to default on U.S. government obligations, then we are in trouble.
But so far, the markets are shrugging it off. The Dow Jones dropped just 1.2% this week. NASDAQ was actually up more than half a point. Aren't your efforts failing to try to use the markets to put pressure on Republicans to cave?
You know, Chris, it's my job to try to make sure we strengthen the economy, and I spend every day trying to do that. That's why it's so important for Congress to act, to open up the government, to make sure we can pay our bills. There's no question but that if we were to have the unthinkable happen and have the United States default, it would cause real problems. The only question is how serious the problems would be, and there's a kind of range of how bad the consequences are. But why would anyone want to do that to the American economy at a time when the American people are showing their resilience, recovering from the worst recession since the Great Depression? You know, and this is not a new issue. I'm going to quote to you from something President Reagan wrote to Congress, or said to the country, back in 1983. The full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of the default by the United States, are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and on the value of the dollar and exchange markets. That was President Reagan.
Well, let me quote to you, because the Treasury Department issued a report late this week that said a possible default would be, quote, catastrophic. Here's what your own Treasury Department report said. Credit markets could freeze. The value of the dollar could plummet. U.S. interest rates could skyrocket, and there might be a financial crisis and recession that could echo the events of 2008 or worse. On the other hand, the Fed continues to pump money into the economy. Given that, what's the likelihood that a default would be catastrophic?
Look, Chris, the good news is there's a majority in Congress that's ready to do the right thing, that's ready to vote to reopen the government,
question, not a political
and that's ready to avoid the kind of unthinkable problems that happen if the United States, for the first time since 1789, willfully defaults on the good full faith and credit of the United States. I don't think there are serious people who think that the consequence is minimal. I mean, people say you can pay some bills and not other bills, but let me ask you a question, Chris. If you pay one bill, so let's just say you pay interest and principal on the debt. I'm not saying that you can. What happens if you don't pay millions of people on Social Security? What happens if you don't pay hospitals and healthcare providers across the country? The consequences are immediate and they're very bad. Congress needs to act.
I asked you an economic question. Would it be catastrophic?
Chris, I am telling you that I know the direction. I know the direction is bad. There are a range of how bad. It is not responsible, it is irresponsible, and it is reckless to take that chance, which is why Congress needs to act.
All right,
you know, it's only Congress that can act to raise the debt limit. It's Congress's authority and responsibility.
All right, you say the consequences would be bad, it would be irresponsible not to act. Despite these stakes, the President refuses to negotiate, saying what Republicans are demanding has never happened before. Take a look.
You have never seen in the history of the United States the debt ceiling, or the threat of not raising the debt ceiling, being used to extort a president or a governing party, and trying to force issues that have nothing to do with the budget and have nothing to do with the debt.
But, Mr. Secretary, that is just not true. Congress has voted to raise the debt ceiling 53 times since 1978, more than half. 27 times it's been linked to something else. And among those items it's been linked to campaign finance reform, school prayer, and busing, and a nuclear freeze. What's unprecedented is not Congress tying strings. What's unprecedented is the President refusing to negotiate.
You know, Chris, let me be clear. The President has always been looking for a way to negotiate, find that reasonable middle ground with a bipartisan group of members and senators to do the right thing for the American people. He was, he is. He put out a budget that actually took an enormous step to do that. So the president is open to negotiation. The question about the debt limit is different, and frankly, I think your history is wrong. If you look at the cases where the debt limit was involved, there were many other things attached to the debt limit, but the question of threatening to cause a default of the United States, not until 2011 did it become a positive agenda.
Mr. Secretary, your history, with all due respect, your history is wrong. In 1973, Democrats in the Senate, including Ted Kennedy and Walter Mondale, wanted to attach campaign finance reform under Richard Nixon during Watergate to raising the debt limit. It ended up being a filibuster. Republicans had to filibuster to defeat it and take it out. This has happened over and over again, and presidents have negotiated. And this president, what's unprecedented is he's refusing to negotiate.
You know, Chris, I lived through the budget debates of the 1980s, the 1990s, the early 2000s. I know that there were many occasions when the debt limit was tacked on to other things. I actually remember when the debt limit was used as a deadline, an action-forcing event. It was different in 2011. In 2011, you had 50 to 100 members of the House who said if we don't get our way, we would rather see the default of the United States, and that was different. It was different. And I think what the president is saying is Congress has to do its job. It has to open the government. It has to make it so we can pay our bills.
But you're moving
and
the
then
goal
we
line.
need to
John
sit
Boehner
down
says
and
he
we need to
doesn't want to
negotiate.
default, sir. So why not sit down with them and talk? You're the one who's saying that they're ready to take the economy down. They say they don't want to take the economy down. You agree. In 1997, you were deputy director of OMB when the debt limit was tied to measures to balance the budget. If it was good enough for Bill Clinton to sit down and negotiate with the House Speaker, why isn't it good enough for Barack Obama?
Chris, in 1997, I sat through every meeting in the balanced budget negotiations. No one once raised the issue of threatening default.
Neither is John Boehner.
Now, John Boehner, I know John Boehner. We have a good relationship. I've talked to John Boehner. I know he doesn't want to default. He also didn't want to shut the government down. And here we are with a government shutdown. There's a majority in Congress that would vote to do the right thing. A majority needs to be given the chance to work its will.
All right. Let me just look. First of all, John Boehner is not threatening to default. He's saying he doesn't want to default. Republicans are talking right now about a down payment on the debt. They're willing to ease the sequester automatic spending cuts in return for long-term spending cuts through entitlement reform. Will the president negotiate on that as part of a deal to deal with the debt limit and the shutdown?
Chris, we need to separate the issues.
Why?
Congress
Why?
needs
It
to
hasn't
open
been
the
separated
government.
for
Congress needs
years.
to open the government. We're now going into the second week of a government shutdown. It's causing real damage to the American people. Every day, people who thought it was okay to shut the government down, every day they're discovering why it's a problem. You can't fix this by discovering a problem here and there. Congress needs to do its job.
So you're saying the president would refuse to negotiate over a debt solution?
Chris, it's solely Congress's job to pass a budget. They have to pass a budget.
I just want to ask a question. Are you saying the president is refusing to negotiate,
pay our bills? I'm saying the president wants to negotiate. He wants to negotiate in good faith.
Negotiate on the debt limit.
And Chris, Congress needs to do its job, and we then need to negotiate. The president has taken many steps over the last several years to show his willingness to negotiate. He's done it with Democrats saying he's too eager to negotiate. Now, Republicans have not come forward and made comparable movement. If we were in a place a year ago or 2 years ago where everything was on the table, where entitlement reform and tax reform were equally on the table as part of a solution, we wouldn't be where we are now. We came forward. We were willing to do entitlement reform.
Well,
the Republicans need to come forward as well.
Since you say that the possible results could be so, in the words of your report, catastrophic, will the president accept a short-term extension to fund the government and raise the debt limit so you can have talks about the debt?
Look, Congress will have to make a decision what they do. I can tell you that the American economy would be well served by getting some stability and some certainty. These manufactured crises and this brinksmanship over and over again is bad for the economy. It's hurt. You know, we're the world leader. We are the strongest, deepest economy in the world. Our currency is the world's reserve currency. Since 1789, people have depended on the United States for that kind of stability. Congress should act now. I think they should act to take this burden off of the economy. It's a self-inflicted wound, but we'll have to see what Congress does.
I just want to say, I take away from this conversation that even though Republicans are willing to talk about a debt deal or a short-term extension, it's the president who is digging his feet into the ground and saying no negotiations.
Chris, that is not what I said. What I said is Congress.
What are you saying? It sounds like you want unconditional surrender and nothing else,
Congress needs to do its job. You know, we've just spent the last several months with Congress creating this ridiculous choice where either you repeal the Affordable Care Act or you shut down the government or default on the United States. That is not the way we should do business. They need to do their job. They need to open the government. They need to fund our ability to pay our bills. These are old bills, Chris. These aren't new bills.
I understand that, sir.
And then we are open to negotiation. The president has been, is, and will always be